Hello, my name's Phil Birss and welcome back to the Ginger Nut Marketing Podcast here on YouTube. I've just finished recording an interview with Bruce Daisley. Bruce is the VP for EMEA at Twitter, and he's also the author of this book, The Joy of Work. So we had a great chat about the book. We also talked about his time at Twitter and some of the things he's been trying to implement in the last couple of years. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Bruce, it's fantastic to have you here today. Thank you very much for joining us on the Ginger Nut Marketing Podcast. First question, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Bruce Daisley. So we chatted yesterday, didn't we?
Yes.
Just go show sort of the power of these things. You came up to me and I said, let's do it. I am Vice President at Twitter. I run our European business in my side hustle mode, in my spare time mode. I've got a passion and obsession for workplace culture. And I've ended up sort of being consumed with like a sort of keen interest in understanding how we can be more motivated, more successful, happier, candidly, in our jobs. And so that's sort of become my side obsession. So I've done a podcast for the last 2.5 years on that, and sort of done about 75 episodes of that. And then in addition, I've written the best-selling, a moment of self-promotion, the best-selling business book of the year. So The Joy of Work, I've written 30 ways to improve your work culture. So that's the best-selling business book of the year against all the big names that you might know of business books. So I'm quite pleased about that.
Fantastic. And what motivates you, Bruce? What drives you? Where does that passion come from?
There's someone I know really close to me, and she said that oh, I find this interesting work culture you've got a bit frustrating, because she said, in my job, a lot of people go to the toilet to cry at lunchtime. There's a real condescending, bullying culture. She said, I don't think you could change my work. And that made me really sad, because, I've worked in bars, I've worked in restaurants, I've worked in fast food places. I've also done sort of careers, proper grown-up jobs. And I've seen good versions of all of them and bad versions of all of them. And so I'm convinced there is a good way to make any job better. And that doesn't mean, one of the things you often find when you talk about making work culture better, or wellness programs, or all these things, people feel that it's like an act of corporate altruism. It's like, times are hard, so we couldn't afford to have a wellness program. Times are hard, so we couldn't afford to have a good culture. And actually, I'm resolutely of the opinion that that's a decision. It's not an imperative. One of the most inspiring and brilliant people that I could ever recommend to people is this woman called Zeynep Ton. And she's an academic from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and literally an inspiration. And she's studied supermarkets. So she's studied retail jobs around the world. And what she's found is that the strategic choices, you can either choose to give people who work there a good job, or you could choose to give people a bad job, but neither is definitively more profitable. In fact, the businesses she looked at Mercador, which is an incredibly successful, it's the biggest supermarket in Spain, and its profit per head is 50% higher than Carrefour, the French hypermarket, or a business called Quick Trip. Its revenue per square foot, so it's American. Its revenue per square foot is double its category, the best in its category. But each of those companies is set out to give the workers there a really good working culture, a really good working environment. So, it's clear to me that this isn't like first world problems. This isn't, you get to culture when you've sorted out your profitability. Actually, it seems to be a route to sustainable profitability.
How does that all been embraced at Twitter? I know you've been there about 7 years now. Is that a core part of the role? Or is that something you've brought in?
Well, look, number one, it's my favorite ever job, and I absolutely adore it. It's a place where I laugh every day. I'm always inspired with the people I work with. So, resolutely, I feel fortunate to work here. But I think we do something called OKR. So, what are our deliverables? And one of the 4 deliverables that every manager has got in the company is to create a love where you work culture. So all of us have got a driving imperative, a need, a sort of an expectation that we should be thinking about what it's like to work here and thinking about how we can optimize that to make people happier.
And is that top down? Has that come from the board as well at Twitter?
Yeah, I mean, look, Jack Dorsey's sort of, I think, a very progressive worker. He's sort of an exemplar of all these things. He he'll often post his daily metrics, and it's that he's got 8.5 hours sleep a night, and that his heart rate is 42, and he's got sort of metrics to die for. But while he does 2 jobs, he's the CEO of 2 companies. It's not at the expense. He's not one of these people who is performatively always claiming that he's always working, he's always busy. He does 2 jobs, and I can't imagine the demands and pressures upon that. But he optimizes for good sleep. He walks to work. He goes on silent meditative retreats every year. So he tries to practice a sustainable set of good living rules, really.
I think lots of our listeners are marketeers, they're entrepreneurs, they're business owners. And I get lots of questions about side hustles and about whether you should invest in your own future through the medium of side hustles. And I was just really interested to understand what Jack and the team, how they supported your side hustle, which is the Joy of Work project, because I'm assuming that they both impact each other in some way.
But not really. So I do my podcast and I do all of my writing at weekends.
Okay.
I would say, I would say resolutely, I've taken a week off to promote the book. I've done some things here and there, but resolutely until then, I would say that, none of my colleagues would have ever said, oh, he's only giving 10% of us, of himself to the job. So, I fully do my job. I'm doing some big changes and stuff at the moment at work that, is not for the want of ambition. So I just try and sort of, I make sure that I'm fulfilling my responsibilities. I would hate my colleagues to think, I've just got my 360 appraisal back and but I would hate somehow to get that back and to see my colleagues thinking, oh yeah, he's kind of stopped doing the day job. Because I think that would be letting everyone down, in truth.
Yeah. And what do you love about working at Twitter? If you could summarize it in one short elevator pitch to me, what is it you love about working there?
Yes, I've worked at other big tech firms in the past, and I think, in contrast and in contrast to some of the other jobs I've done, we've got a lot of autonomy here. So, when I sit down with the country manager, the guy who's the MD of the UK, a guy called Dara Nasser, when I sit down with Dara, every day we laugh a lot. And also, it's us calling the shots. It's us, it's him really, and me. Sort of, we sit down and we hatch plans, and pretty much we can do those plans. And so, consequently, I think one of the big things about any job is the sense that your decisions are going to stick. You make a decision. And you make a decision, and somehow that decision isn't going to be subject to the whims and the sort of the scrutiny of other people, but your decision is going to hold. And I think that sense of autonomy and agency is so important for doing a job, because if you think that anytime you're doing a job you're going to be subject to your boss overruling it, then are you even doing a job? If a decision happened in the forest and it didn't stick, is it really a decision,
Do you, I was going to say, do you, I know in your book you talk about the mill worker and the more, should we call it, traditional management style?
Yeah, so for the benefit of listeners, that is, the notion, someone came to me, a brilliant guy chatting to me, and he said, he thinks he's one of the good guys, but in his work, he can't help, but he finds himself having an 18th century mill owner inside him. And by that, he meant sort of, when people aren't at their desks at 2:00 in the afternoon, the mill owner inside him is like, where is everyone?
Yeah.
They're all slacking. They're all slacking. And, that sort of sense that somehow people, if left to their own devices, would be innately lazy. I think that's what the mill owner's worried about. And the truth of it is that we've all got a little bit of that. The banking sector is a fascinating place to look. And I spent a lot of time sort of looking at the banking industry, because it's a really good comparison point to industries where people are just working excessive hours. And what
Mm.
you observe is the banking industry for 100 years has been built on 16-hour days. 100 years. People getting in, at 7 in the morning and leaving late at night, and 100 years. But what's happened in the last few years is that 16, 17-hour day has been combined with people being on their devices on the hours they're not in the office. And the toll that has had is that people feel completely frazzled by it. In fact, the toll in the banking industry of skin problems, hair loss, stress, anxiety, depression, addiction, it's like the toll of it is extraordinary. And it's largely down to the fact that they're working in an unsustainable way, the hazing ritual that their bosses have done. But now we've added digital devices to it. And so I think, the interesting thing for me is observing that. What lessons can we learn from those industries? What are the things that we can observe about overwork? That, while we might not be working 120 hours a week, actually a lot of us are probably working a bit more than we were, our predecessors were, the colleagues who joined the work sort of a few years ago. We're probably working more than them, and so actually it's quite interesting for us to observe that and to try and think about how we can channel that, really.
Because I know one of your big tenets is that creativity is important to any company, and it's what powers the growth of the company. And I just want to ask you, why is creativity so important for a business?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the critical thing is that, firstly, I need to disabuse the idea of what creativity is. I think a lot of us might find ourselves in a situation where we're sitting at our desk and maybe, we might be doing something and we believe that we've got creative colleagues, but we're not creative. And so I think, the word creativity sometimes in itself is the problem. But if you said to any of us, do you need to have a degree of guile about doing the job that you did last year a bit better? I think all of us are tasked with doing what we did last year a bit better. And that might mean they're a marketer, they might mean they're a salesperson, they might be just responsible for the post room, but they're responsible for doing the job they did last year a bit better. And that's where creativity lives. Creativity is trying to improve upon things. And basically, you don't improve upon things by doing the same as last year, right? You've got actually I thought maybe we'd try this. Oh, right, that worked. That's where creativity lives. So creativity is relevant to all of us. But as we look forward, and I think one of the challenges we've all got is that imagining the future becomes immensely difficult. If as I said to you at the event we were at yesterday, I said if any of us sat down and said, okay, can you just draw what your phone will do in the next 5 years? Okay. And I suspect all of us would say, right, better camera, better screen, and then would struggle, right? And so that's the only reference point we've got. But no doubt that our devices, probably powered by the machine learning inside them, will start doing all manner of things that we can't even anticipate now. And that's the problem when it comes to work. When it comes to work, our jobs will transform in the next 10 years. And it's almost certain that one of the ways that they'll transform is some of the stuff that we do now will be done more effectively by computers. The predictable stuff, very good at doing predictable things. So, the reason why Gmail has started finishing people's sentences, the machine learning chips in there, is because it can predict what the sentence, the word you're going to use is. Nice to meet you. Get back to me as whenever, it can predict the end of those sentences.
Yeah.
And so predictable parts of our job are going to be taken very, very sort of satisfyingly by computers. And so it's that inventiveness. So let's not use the word creativity, but that inventiveness is going to be what humans are better at. And that's why we need to be focused on it. And so I think probably the follow-up to your question is, what impact does the way we're working have on that inventiveness? What impact does the way we're working have on that creativity with a sort of small c? And what it does, to quote Gregory Burns from Emory University, he says the most concrete thing that neuroscience teaches us is that the fear system in our brain kills our capacity to be creative. And that's the fundamental thing. If we're thinking about the future of work being us needing to be more filled with guile, with inventiveness, with creativity, with originality, fear kills our capacity to do it. And so that's why I always say, I try and reach for examples. I try and say, look, think of your favorite musical artist. Their second album was, it was something that you were, maybe like you were 19, you couldn't wait for their second album to come out. And then sadly, it just wasn't as fresh, as inventive, as clever.
Mm.
You're waiting for your favorite stand-up comic to go on tour again. Yeah, it doesn't feel as good. Why? Because the stuff that they invented when they were in a state of carefree abandon was in a completely different context. What happens is, as time goes on, people fear, stress, anxiety, the brain interprets all these things broadly the same. These things start permeating our cognitive powers, and they stop us being as inventive and creative.
And how does decision making and our power to make decisions affect our creativity, our innovation, or our ability to adapt and solve these problems we're going to face?
Yeah, well, look, number one, I was really fascinated. I read something last week that Jeff Bezos, and I guess that this is the luxury of being the richest man in the world, but Jeff Bezos says he thinks a good day is making 3 decisions.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I think what we tend to do is we overload ourselves. There's some science, and for me, this is like fascinating and game changing. There's some science that suggests that our brains are far more finite than we might think. And so the science, you're welcome to go and search it on Google Scholar. The science is called ego depletion. And what the science of ego depletion tells us is this. In the words of Daniel Levitin, who wrote a book called The Organized Mind, what the science of ego depletion tells us is this. Here's a quotation from him. He says, our brains are configured to make a certain number of decisions per day. And once we reach that limit, we are unable to make any more, regardless of how important they are. Right. So that's a really interesting thing. So let me give you an example of what that looks like. When you reach that limit, here's how it manifested in banking. So here's how it manifests in banking. That people would come in and they would do like 8 or 9 hours of cognitive work. But the bankers would say, in a big survey of them, they would say, and one banker said, I wake up every morning and I'm ashamed of what I did with regard to their addictions. I'm ashamed of the way I finished my evening, consuming alcohol and drugs. And I'm resolving to myself that I won't allow myself to do it again. And yet, at some point, the body appears to take over. And that's the fascinating thing, because that is the science of ego depletion. We reach a limit, and what happens once we've reached that stage of actual cognitive burnout, all the science points to this. That's when we start doing things that we sort of feel remorseful about, we feel regretful. Now, it becomes fascinating, right? Because, we sort of, so often we try and model ourselves on this superhuman model of work, this idea that we can work and work and work and work and work. And us at 11 p.m. is as good as us at 11 a.m.
Yeah.
And the truth is, not only are we not as good, our judgment isn't as good, our decision making isn't as good, our creativity isn't as good. We tend to be sort of less collaborative to others. And I think, for me, the fascination is that sleep has gone on like a really interesting journey in the last few years, where it used to be, if you were getting a good night's sleep, somehow high performers tried to pretend that you were indolent.
Yeah.
And actually, look, athletes never go without sleep. One of the biggest growth industries in sport in the last 15, 20 years is sleep scientists, and they travel the world giving advice of how athletes can optimize their sleep. Almost every professional football club has got a sleep scientist. The British Olympic team has multiple sleep scientists. But the science of sleep has fundamentally changed in the last 10 years. But I don't think yet we've seen the science of working change, and I think it's about to.
I think it's really interesting because you reflect back to the London Olympics. I remember all the athletes, the British athletes, were saying that they were told to bring their own pillow from home. A better sleep, and it was like that tiny percentage.
Absolutely,
would build up to make this impact where they have a better chance of performing.
Absolutely, and there's one of the Olympic coaches who's written a book on sleep, and they try to get it down. It's a bit like if you ever watch a tennis player do their serve. It's actually far more programmed by heuristics than you would imagine. They reach into their pocket. They always have one extra ball there. They bounce the ball 3 times. They toss them. It's a routine. Why? Because like they know that if you learn a heuristic, you minimize changes, and they do the same with sleep. So they have a really clear pattern. You always wear the same eye mask, even if you're in a dark room. You always have your same smells. You have your sleep suit because it signals like they've elevated the science of sleeping away from like the randomness that you or I do into an art.
Bloody hell.
I know, and
It's crazy, isn't it? It also makes me. It makes me. I'm not a big fan of the 4 a.m. club. I don't know if you heard about the 4 a.m. club, but there's this group of people around the world that say you have to be up at 4 a.m., get half the day done before 8 a.m. So you're in the office and you've got your priorities straight and you've looked after your mental and physical health. But I can't imagine them not going to bed before 10, 11, 12 o'clock. So I'm thinking, how do you survive on 4 hours sleep?
Yeah, it's the lie we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
One of the best things in the wonderful book by Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep, and in the wonderful thing in there, he talks about how the impact that light sleep has upon us, and often the damage is irreparable. But the one thing he goes on to say is, he says, it increases your likelihood of heart disease, your likelihood of mental degeneration. It reduces your memory, it increases your chance of getting, there's all manner of things. One thing he says in the 1980s, and I'm much older than the 1980s, but in the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were sort of iconic for both professing that they needed 4 hours sleep a night. And both of them, Matthew Walker sort of remarks upon this, both of them died of degenerative brain conditions.
Wow.
And what he says resolutely is, he says that effectively it's a bit like your mind is being, your brain is a city, and the streets need to be cleaned every night. And he said, actually, what happens, he describes it quite graphically. He says it's almost like all the buildings shrivel a bit in the night so that the streets can be cleaned more effectively. That's what happens during the course of the night. He says if you don't sleep enough, the buildings don't withdraw, and the toxins start building up on those streets. The streets gradually get dirtier and dirtier and dirtier, with the impact that your brain isn't working functionally. Yeah. And so, I think, he describes it very, I couldn't recommend a book more, Matthew Walker's Why We Sleep.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Apart from The Joy of Work by Bruce Daisley.
Hey, top seller, Bruce. Come on.
Here we go.
I know lots of entrepreneurs that are very, how should I put it, motivated and very kind of driven towards this, Elon Musk type world of working 16 hours a day and 7 days a week. And I'm the opposite to that. I'm more in the balance. Having balance in your life, having balance in your job, because actually that's what I'm completely with you. I think that's what really impacts your creativity, your productivity, and your ability to enjoy life, which I assume is what you're focusing on, is about getting the most out of life.
Yeah, and look, as I sort of said at the outset, that these things aren't an either or. It's often, I've worked in 2 startups, and people often try to say, oh, you don't understand the startup mentality. When you're a startup, you need to be working all these hours. And my point to them is always this, that look, number one, I presume any startup is trying to prevail. It's trying to assert the fact that the one thing it doesn't have is, it doesn't have the assets of a big company. Yeah. But it probably can have the ingenuity and the dexterousness of thinking to avoid the things that big companies do. And so consequently, you're saying to me that one of the most important things is going to be, the ability to spot things. And if working long and hard is demonstrably in lab tests proven time and time again to reduce our decision-making ability, to reduce our ability to spot opportunities, then I would say work is the lie you're telling yourself. We often lie to ourselves about our jobs because it suits the narrative. Marissa Mayer was former CEO of Yahoo, employee number 20 at Google. And she was asked what the secret of her success was. And I think if the Hallmark Channel was doing a biopic of her life, they would say the fact that she was employee number 20 at Google was the reason why she was a billionaire. But she said the secret of her success is she worked 16, 17 hours a day. She slept under her desk 3 nights a week. And my favourite detail is she often didn't go for the bathroom for hours at a time. So she was holding a wee in for hours at a time. So like that's the lie she tells herself. But when you look at people who do that work and work like that, it's unsustainable. It causes health problems for them. You know, we can measure their decision making. Their decision making isn't good. So look, you know, I would say startup founders especially, trying to find a way that you can work sustainably seems to be your secret weapon when it comes to trying to ensure the success of your business.
Absolutely. So moving forward then, Bruce, what's the secret sauce then? What's the top 5 tips for people who are looking to get more out of their employees and about more of their business, be more productive in general?
Yeah, I think, you know, like the whole of work is constructed for a lot of us is constructed on these sort of concrete blocks of email and meetings. And, you know, I think asking ourselves honestly what happens, the way that we're using meetings is an important start. Yeah. Asking ourselves honestly the way we're using emails is an important start. And you know, that's not sort of a Luddite sense of saying, let's remove the reliance on these things. But, you know, most of us have got into a zone. There's a really interesting bit of evidence by an anthropologist, psychologist called Robin Dunbar. And he said that human brain is only able to trust 150 people. And that's an interesting thing. So we can only trust 150 people. And then people went to him and they said, okay, so in the world of people having 700, 800 Facebook friends, people said to Robin Dunbar, okay, do you think in hindsight, do you want to change your number, Robin? And he went back, quite thoughtfully, he went back and reassessed his work. And he said, no, absolutely, the human brain can only trust 150 people. So everything else is an illusion. It's a lie we're telling ourselves. But he said, when you reach 150 people, 45% of your time is spent maintaining those relationships. Oh, wow. Social grooming, he called it. And that number is very consistent with the amount of time we spend in meetings. And so, you know, we've got into our heads this idea that we need to keep everyone in the loop. We need to, you know, be structured in spending our time doing meetings and emails. And I think the more that we can try and liberate ourselves from that, the better, I think. So, you know, I think that's one of the things I would say. Therefore, when it comes down to it, how would anyone improve work culture? I think, number one, trying to reduce the tug of work upon us. A third of Brits wake up every day and think about work the moment they wake up. And, you know, back to professional sports people, if you go and I chatted to Pippa Grange, who's like the head of talent and culture at the England football team. And she said, you know, and actually they will say to you resolutely, the best coaches, there's a wonderful book by Owen Slott called The Talent Lab, looking at the best performing coaches at London 2012 and Rio 2016. And the coaches who fail are the ones where the athletes can't switch off. Where the coaches are saying, come on, focus, and they're inviting them to focus all the time. The best coaches understand that being in a state of unfocus is important for bringing us back to focus later. We can't, despite like our best, most earnest pronouncements, we can't be serious all the time. We can't be focused all the time. And actually, if we are, what happens is the quality of our focus dilutes. You know, we're like, when the brain doesn't work like that. The brain wasn't configured to do these sort of ridiculous things that we do now. So recognizing that light and shade is an important part, the yin yang of work.
The balance.
You know, yeah, work and rest seem to be really important. So, so just, you know, understanding that elite athlete coaches, and I think we can measure sport far more effectively than we can work. So that's why sometimes it gives us pointers. But, you know, so Pippa Grange said to me, back to how I started this, she said, like, it's really important that the whole day of football players is programmed. But there was a wonderful photograph of England players all on inflatable unicorns in the swimming pool at their training camp in the last World Cup. And this photo came around. And of course, you know, probably people might look at that and go, well, shouldn't they be training? Shouldn't they be? But far from it, making sure they had moments where they weren't thinking about football was a really good part of ensuring that they did a good job.
Wow. I remember that unicorn picture.
in it, right? Like
Yeah.
she gets it. She
Yeah.
gets it. Like, look, I understand. It's why sometimes I try not to. I try not to watch football in a pub, but I remember being in pubs and watching players on the bench, cutaways. A player on the bench is laughing,
Mm.
and that there'll be someone in the pub go, they shouldn't be laughing, or you know how much he earns, he shouldn't be laughing. It's a total lack of empathy.
Yeah.
So laughter is a really important coping mechanism. It helps us deal with stress. It helps us cope with situations. Anyone who finds, if we were to mandate that doctors, that teachers, that firemen, that footballers can't laugh, good luck, because you're taking away one of their secret weapons.
God. It's so interesting. It's so interesting to have a different perspective, Bruce. So thank you very much for your time today. My final question is, following off on the back of yesterday's talk you did, headphones or no headphones in the work environment?
Yeah, so look, the mistake that happens there is that bosses remember that in their day, bosses sort of trot across the vast open plan savannah that they've created for us as they head towards their corner office, their corner little ivory tower. Then they wander past a quiet sea of people wearing headphones. And so they pronounce, well, in their day, people never used to wear headphones, and there was a great buzz on the office floor. And what they miss is, the changes that we've seen to work in the intervening time. We've seen the volume of emails go up exponentially. The volume of internal communications has gone up about 20 or 30 fold. So the expectations upon people have gone up massively, and we're in sort of a zone where people are wearing headphones largely as a coping strategy. They're wearing headphones to try to like deal with the situation that they're in, and to cope with them. So my feeling is resolutely that we shouldn't necessarily we shouldn't restrict the use of headphones. We should try and negotiate in our teams how we use headphones and when we use them.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Bruce, I'm going to grab your book. Hold on. I'm going to give you a shameless piece of promo. The Joy of Work is out on Amazon. Do you recommend we go and buy it, Bruce?
I would strongly recommend that people go and take advantage of the 35% discount that Amazon are offering.
Fantastic. Bruce, I can't thank you enough for your time today. You've been really, really great. And I really appreciate you coming on the Ginger Nut Marketing Podcast.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Take care.